In the book of Exodus, the story begins with Jacob's family, known as the children of Israel, arriving in Egypt. Jacob had 12 sons: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. When they came to Egypt, they brought a total of 70 people from Jacob's lineage. One of Jacob's sons, Joseph, was already in Egypt, having been sold into slavery years before. Over time, Joseph and his generation passed away, but the Israelites continued to grow in number and strength, filling the land of Egypt. Exodus 1 verses 1-7. Pharaoh's fear and oppression. A new Pharaoh came to power, one who did not know Joseph or the good he had done for Egypt. This Pharaoh noticed the increasing population of the Israelites and felt threatened. He feared that the Israelites might join Egypt's enemies in a war and leave the land, so he decided to control them. Pharaoh forced the Israelites into hard labor, making them build treasure cities like Pithom and Ramses. Despite this oppression, the Israelites continued to multiply, which frustrated the Egyptians. Exodus 1 verses 8-14. To further limit the Israelites' growth, Pharaoh ordered the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, to kill all newborn Hebrew boys. However, the midwives feared God and did not obey Pharaoh's command. They let the boys live. When Pharaoh questioned them, the midwives cleverly responded that Hebrew women gave birth quickly, before they could arrive. Because of their bravery, God blessed the midwives, and the Israelite population continued to grow. Exodus 1 verses 15-21. Frustrated, Pharaoh ordered all Egyptians to throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River. Exodus 1 verse 22. During this terrible time, a Levite woman hid her newborn son for 3 months. When she could no longer keep him hidden, she placed him in a basket and set it among the reeds along the riverbank. Pharaoh's daughter found the child, named him Moses, and raised him as her own. Exodus 2 verses 1-10. Moses, a man on the run. As an adult, Moses witnessed an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. In a fit of anger, Moses killed the Egyptian. Fearing punishment for his crime, he fled to Midian. There, he helped the daughters of a Midianite priest named Jethro. Jethro welcomed Moses, and Moses eventually married his daughter Zipporah, having a son named Gershom. Exodus 2 verses 11-22. While Moses was in Midian, God heard the cries of the Israelites suffering in Egypt and remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God appeared to Moses in a burning bush, commanding him to lead the Israelites out of their oppression. Exodus 3 verses 1-10. Although Moses hesitated, God assured him of his presence and equipped him with miraculous signs to convince both the Israelites and Pharaoh of his power. Exodus 3:11-4:17. God's call and assurance. When God called Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, he promised to send Aaron, Moses' brother, to support him. God reassured Moses that Aaron would be happy to see him and serve as his spokesperson. God would instruct both Moses and Aaron on what to say and do. Moses was to take his staff, which would be used to perform miracles. Exodus 4 verses 14-17. Moses then asked Jethro for permission to return to Egypt to check on his people. Jethro wished him well, and God reassured Moses that those who sought his life were dead, making it safe to return. Exodus 4 verses 18-19. Taking his wife, sons, and staff, Moses set out for Egypt. Exodus 4 verse 20. Confrontation with Pharaoh. Upon reaching Egypt, God instructed Moses to perform all the miraculous signs he had given him before Pharaoh. God warned Moses that he would harden Pharaoh's heart so that Pharaoh would not easily let the Israelites go. Moses was to tell Pharaoh that Israel was God's firstborn son, and if Pharaoh refused to release them, God would take the life of Pharaoh's own firstborn. Exodus 4 verses 21-23. During the journey, God confronted Moses about the covenant of circumcision. Moses' wife, Zipporah, intervened by circumcising their son, fulfilling this important covenant. Exodus 4 verses 24 to 26. When Moses and Aaron reunited, they shared God's instructions and performed miracles to convince the Israelite elders. The people believed and worshipped God, thankful that He had seen their suffering. Exodus 4 verses 27 to 31. Moses and Aaron then confronted Pharaoh, asking him to release the Israelites to worship God. Pharaoh, however, refused, questioning, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey His voice?" Exodus 5 verse 2. Increased burden. Instead of granting their request, Pharaoh increased the Israelites' workload, requiring them to gather their own straw to make bricks while still meeting the same production quotas. Exodus 5 verses 6 to 9. This increased burden caused great suffering for the Israelites, leading them to blame Moses and Aaron for making their situation worse. Exodus 5 verses 20 to 21. Moses, feeling frustrated, turned to God and questioned why He had sent him if things were only getting worse. God responded by reaffirming His promise, declaring that He would soon act with a strong hand to free the Israelites and bring them to the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Exodus 6 verses 1 to 8. God reassured Moses that he and Aaron would have the strength needed to confront Pharaoh and lead their people to freedom, no matter how daunting the task seemed. Exodus 7 verses 1 to 5. The plagues of Egypt. The story of the plagues in Exodus illustrates God's power and the struggle of the Israelites for freedom from slavery. God sent Moses and Aaron to warn Pharaoh about the consequences of not letting the Israelites go free to worship Him. Each plague was designed to demonstrate the true power of God, progressively afflicting the Egyptian people and their land. The first plague occurred when Moses turned the Nile's waters into blood. He struck the river with his rod, and all the water turned red, causing the fish to die and the river to stink. The Egyptians had no water to drink. Exodus 7 verses 20 to 21. Pharaoh's magicians managed to replicate this miracle, which only hardened Pharaoh's heart, leading him to refuse Moses and Aaron, just as God had predicted. Exodus 7 verses 22 to 23. Next, God sent a plague of frogs. Frogs infested the land, entering homes and kitchens. Pharaoh's magicians again duplicated this miracle, but when Pharaoh asked Moses to plead with God to remove the frogs, Moses agreed. When the frogs died and were piled up, the land began to stink. Yet once the frogs were gone, Pharaoh's heart hardened again, and he refused to let the Israelites go. Exodus 8 verses 1 to 15. In the third plague, Aaron struck the dust, turning it into lice, which covered people and animals. Exodus 8 verses 16 to 17. This time, Pharaoh's magicians could not replicate the miracle, and they declared, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh remained unyielding. Exodus 8 verses 18 to 19. The fourth plague brought swarms of flies. God protected the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, from the flies, further demonstrating His power. Pharaoh attempted to negotiate, allowing the Israelites to sacrifice within Egypt, but Moses insisted they must go into the wilderness. When Moses prayed for relief, God removed the flies, yet Pharaoh's heart hardened again, and he refused to let the people go. Exodus 8 verses 20 to 32. The plagues continued with disease upon Egyptian livestock, painful boils on people and animals, and devastating hail that destroyed crops and harmed anyone unprotected outside. With each plague, Pharaoh initially pleaded for relief, but then hardened his heart once the plague ended, refusing to obey God's command to release the Israelites. Exodus 9 verses 1 to 35. The darkness and final plague. As the plagues continued, God sent a strong east wind to Egypt, bringing a massive swarm of locusts that devoured everything left after the hailstorm. Exodus 10 verses 13 to 15. Faced with this calamity, Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron, confessing he had sinned against the Lord and asking for relief from the locusts. He promised to let the Israelites go. Exodus 10 verses 16 to 17. Moses prayed, and God sent a strong west wind that swept the locusts into the Red Sea. But once again, Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he refused to release the Israelites. Exodus 10 verses 19 to 20. Next, God instructed Moses to stretch his hand toward heaven to bring a deep darkness over Egypt, a darkness that could be felt, lasting for 3 days. The Egyptians could not see each other or leave their homes, while the Israelites had light in their dwellings. Exodus 10 verses 21 to 23. Pharaoh summoned Moses again, allowing the Israelites to worship but insisting they leave their livestock behind. Moses insisted that they would take their animals too, for they needed them for sacrifices to the Lord. Exodus 10 verses 24 to 26. Pharaoh angrily dismissed Moses, warning him never to return. Exodus 10 verses 28 to 29. God told Moses that he would send one final plague upon Egypt, which would force Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. This plague would involve the death of every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from Pharaoh's firstborn to the firstborn of the animals. God instructed Moses to tell the Israelites to sacrifice a lamb and place its blood on their doorposts. This would protect them from the plague. Exodus 11 verses 1 to 7, 12:1-13. When the time came, God struck down every firstborn in Egypt, causing a great cry throughout the land. Pharaoh finally called for Moses and Aaron in the night, demanding that the Israelites leave immediately. Exodus 12 verses 29 to 32. The Exodus. The Israelites followed God's instructions, celebrating the Passover and marking their doorposts with the lamb's blood. They gathered their belongings and prepared for the journey ahead. The next day, they left Egypt, taking with them bread without yeast, since they had to leave quickly. Exodus 12 verses 33 to 39. As they departed, God led them by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, guiding them through the wilderness. Exodus 13 verses 21 to 22. God instructed Moses to lead the Israelites to the Red Sea, where they would be trapped between the sea and Pharaoh's approaching army. Fear spread among the Israelites as they saw the Egyptians closing in on them. Exodus 14 verses 1 to 12. But God told Moses to lift his staff over the sea. As he did, the waters parted, allowing the Israelites to cross on dry ground. The Egyptians pursued them, but once the last Israelite was across, Moses stretched his hand again over the sea, and the waters returned, drowning Pharaoh and his army. Exodus 14 verses 13 to 31. A new beginning. The Israelites rejoiced, singing praises to God for their miraculous deliverance. Exodus 15 verses 1 to 21. They began their journey toward the Promised Land, led by God's guidance. Although they faced challenges in the wilderness, including hunger and thirst, God provided for their needs, showing them that he was with them and would sustain them on their journey to freedom and a new life. Exodus 16 to 17. The Exodus story is rich with themes of liberation, faith, and divine providence. It highlights God's power over oppression and his unwavering commitment to his covenant people. The plagues demonstrate God's sovereignty, while the Passover signifies redemption. The Israelites' journey through the wilderness teaches reliance on God, illustrating that true freedom comes from faith in him. The story of Exodus reminds believers today of God's faithfulness and the hope of liberation, inspiring faith and courage in times of trial. It emphasizes the importance of obedience to God's commands and the joy that comes from deliverance and salvation.
If you found this video enjoyable, please consider liking and sharing it. Additionally, subscribing to this channel will ensure that you receive more updates in the future. Thank you.